Da 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 da. The old folks know what that theme was from.
Yes, indeed.
Lay,
Are you Peter? You gonna be Peter Marshall this morning, or?
lay. I actually went to school with his cousin.
Oh, hold on for a second.
What's up?
I have to. I'm signing on to YouTube, and
Oh, so you can play catch up.
so I can play catch up
Yeah,
here.
I think we're running about a minute behind. I haven't seen anybody saying hello yet on the chat board. But let's say hello anyway to everybody out there. Sunday morning, it's that wonderful combination of coffee with Cioffi with the Joe and Joe Weather Show.
And it was the wind woke me up this morning, Joe. It's kind of breezy out there.
Yeah, no, it's blowing away here. Also, uh, yes, I have some sun. My God, yesterday it was gloom and doom around here. It was
Yeah,
awful.
it
Uh,
was a horrible day.
one of the real downsides this time of year, if you're gonna be warmer than average, fine. Do it with a big ridge up the East Coast all the way up so that we can have sunshine and or at least some sun. Okay. But this time of year, when you get into a pattern that's not, truly a cold one, uh, when it's not precipitate, you get one day of sun at most, and that's it. And even when you do get it, you got to deal with clouds and pretty much. I have actually a little bit more sun now than I had about an hour ago, so a few slivers of sunshine at least.
Well, a little bit more sunshine up here. We did start out kind of cloudy this morning, but slowly but surely the sun is increasing now in intensity and in visibility. And I think by the time we get to the afternoon, it'll be a gusty, sunny afternoon. And those wind chills probably making it feel like it's anywhere from the mid 30s to the mid 20s. So if you're going to be out and about this afternoon, you had best bundle up.
Tony M has got a 43-mile-an-hour wind gust in Harrison, New Jersey, the highest gust in his Mesonet network. Believe it or not, that's
Wow.
from the he Tony's got the most outrageous, and I mean that in a positive way, weather setup. He's amazing. He's got him.
Yeah. He's contacted me. He lives in New Jersey, right?
And
Northern.
yeah, and
Yeah,
Harrison.
yeah, yeah.
I've been
And
I've been to his place. He is a for folks that like weather equipment and all the bells and whistles. Oh, he's got them all. He's just a great and a very very nice man, by the way.
he sounds like he lives or is his residence is the kind of place where you would actually pay admission to go and go in.
Well, you know what? At least from the weather stamp, I think the weather geeks out there would find it to be the Disneyland of weather. So hey, so
So it's Sunday, January 5th,
it
and the
is.
year is really going by fast, Joe.
But I've always had for me, and I have always kind of viewed it like this. Once you get to Halloween, that time period from Halloween till Christmas night, okay, so the night of December 25th at night, that's like one long day. It's like a giant black hole. The time goes by so fast. One day blends into the next. Then you've got that period between Christmas and New Year's where you actually lose track of what day of the week it is.
Right.
So next week, I mean, starting today, uh, I think we're back to some sense of normalcy.
Yeah, and when now? I guess at Rockefeller Center they'll continue to light the tree for tonight and tomorrow night. And I guess after tomorrow night, tomorrow being the Epiphany, after that they'll just shut everything down and take everything down, right? Or
I think they leave it up through the 10th, and of course January 6th being the Epiphany is when we celebrate the notion of how horrible men are when it comes to shopping for baby gifts.
well, it has been a while. I mean, I think and I don't think I'm imagining it. I've heard on radio stations Christmas music going all the way back to just after Halloween, and now, of course, it's all over. At
Yeah.
least minds of the broadcast people. The holidays are long gone,
Yep.
They're long gone at 12:01 a.m. on December 26th, actually.
And now it's I guess the long dry stretch that the next 2 months, which there's not a whole lot happening, um, and it's just the dead of winter.
Valentine's Day.
There's not a whole lot happening, and there's the dead of winter. Okay, we don't want to get into Valentine's Day, do we?
No, we don't. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, all right,
I,
good.
mean, I was beginning to think, Joe, that was it Scott Briller who said that there has only been at Central Park one January out of the last 160 some odd years that did not have any snow at all?
Yeah, that was like 1890 something.
And I'm beginning to think now that if we don't get, if Central Park does not, whoever does the observation there, I guess the Central Park Conservancy, if they don't see any snowflakes in the air a Tuesday night, it is not out of the question, I think, that we challenge that record and go.
Maybe, yeah. You know what happens, Joe, though, and this is something you can't really foresee at this point, even in the most dire of patterns, particularly in January and February, even in the most dire setup, from the standpoint of how snow lovers feel about these things. These little windows of opportunity do appear, and I think if it doesn't happen now, there'll probably be a couple of windows of opportunity happening down the road. And I mean, I know from the long range, it doesn't look. One of the things you got to be really careful of when you look at the long range pattern is trying to kind of you look at it now and you think that it's going to last forever, and it's not. It's going to break down eventually. I mean, it just doesn't look good through from up until through at least the middle part of the month, and maybe a little bit beyond that. But I don't know. I'm not. I actually think we probably will pick up something on later Tuesday into Tuesday night. That's my view. I don't know if you did. You look at the new NAM yet?
I have not checked anything yet. I
All
mean,
right. So
I
then.
have my roll and a tea and whatever. So
Oh,
uh,
good. I got my coffee all set to go. So why don't we take a look at what's happening? I'll bring up a couple of maps. Shall we? Anything you want in specific?
no,
Just
surface map, or if you want to start with the upper air.
all right. So look? Why don't we?
Whatever.
Well, let's bring up. I'll bring up the surface map right now, and I got the 12Z map. And of course, you got a 979 low south of Nova Scotia, and a fairly tight pressure gradient with the big high with a 1030-ish high down in southern Alabama. And you can already there's another low that's moving southeastward into toward Lake Superior. So we've got a little weather system coming through tonight. And by the way, the the upper trough that's coming through for tonight might be enough if you get some snow showers to reach New York City and Long Island. Uh, that might even be enough to put down zero point 0.1 inch of snow, which is all Central Park needs. Just to go back to what you were saying before.
Well, does it have to be point one, or it could even be a trace? I'm not sure now. When Scott Briller said that, I'm not sure if he said an entire month in January of whatever 1890 something or whatever, if that was a trace of snow or whether it was an absolute zero,
Okay, I can't. Let me.
273 degrees below zero
Yeah, I can't. Very nice.
Celsius.
Um, let me just move. I can't. I can't see the chat and have you on the screen at the same time, even though I got my monitors extended. I've got too many windows open up. But let me see if I can pull that up on my.
Well,
Uh,
Mark Glatfeller says, yeah, too early to say that. Obviously, to say that we may go through the month of January snowless. Um,
Good.
and
You monitor the chat board on your end. That'll make it easier for me.
and Bobby Livingsworth says, I'm leaving the last 10 days of January open, Joe.
Okay.
Uh, Um, and Latex Dream says, to hell with New York.
That's actually a common phrase that's being used lately around the People's Republic of the State of New York, but no matter. So, you got this tight gradient. This next, the upper trough would probably produce a bit more were it not for the fact that it's so close to the storm that's offshore. But on the other hand, the storm is offshore probably because of the upper air trough that's coming out to the west. So, one sort of follows the other. And actually, on the radar as of 11 o'clock, there's a fairly nice looking twist of precip of snow in northern Wisconsin and in the upper peninsula of Michigan that's moving right along. So it's not a half bad looking system with the upper air support, and there's a little lake effect going on in southwestern New York this morning. I kind of think that the system for tonight, it's going to happen probably after midnight and before daybreak. Could leave a coating in some places. It wouldn't be a big shocker,
Yeah, it would have to be.
or a little bit more.
If it's a real, as we say in the business, a real digger, so to speak, if it had enough diffluence as it swung like a pendulum across the northeastern states, yeah, you could see some spots break out with some rather robust snow shower and flurry activity. It could leave in its wake a little bit of a coating out there, so I
Yeah,
wouldn't rule that out completely.
I put up the Weather Service on their digital forecast of total snow between now and 1 a.m. Tuesday. So this doesn't have any the stuff for later Tuesday night. Generally, it's got some 3-inch plus amounts in northwest PA, southwestern New York, and the leading edge of that light blue that it has is probably where you could see the chance that there could be a little bit of a coating. And I mean, they have it actually lined up in a few spots in the counties in northern New Jersey, up by you. They actually even have like a thumbprint over Nassau, East Nassau, West Suffolk County, southern Connecticut, and up the Hudson Valley. And of course, the amounts get a little higher through upstate New York, some 2 to 4 inch amounts, but most of the snows are in that 1 to 3 category from northeast New York on up into Vermont and New Hampshire, and then a little bit less in the state of Maine. So this is all with regards to this weather system for tonight, which we can show you. I got the satellite loop up, and so you can see the coastal low and the clouds with the coastal low and that sliver of dry air in between. Meanwhile, by the way, from Virginia south to Florida, and west through Texas and throughout the lower and middle Mississippi Valley, it's cloud free. I mean, it's just absolutely a beautiful day in that part of the world.
Yeah, and you were talking about the system tonight. I'm just looking here. I have access to the RPM model, and what the RPM is suggesting is that we may be brushed at kind of a glancing blow, so to speak, for some snow, beginning about 7:30 Z, which would be 2:30 in the morning Eastern time, late tonight or tomorrow morning, and that could continue mostly for northern Jersey and the Hudson Valley until it all marches out of here sometime around mid morning tomorrow. So, yeah, I guess you talk about a cheap thrill. That might be it.
All right, so we get through that. Monday dayside after this system swings through doesn't really look all that terrible. Probably have some sun in the mix, and then we jump over to Tuesday. So I'm going to bring up I'll bring up the upper air with Tuesday first.
Tuesday may actually be more favorable. I would think from New York City and points south, maybe down across the Jersey area, and maybe even down across Long Island, as opposed to up here in the Hudson Valley, where nothing may happen at all. That the
Well,
activity may be just to the south and to the east. What do you say about
I think you're right. This is a smallish low that eventually gets going when it heads up northeast. So the geographic area that you describe, I think, is also the one that's most favorable. Actually, I'm just moving through the upper trough on the NAM model, looking at the 500 millibar level, and you've got this. There's this southern shortwave that is moving along into western Kentucky, and then you've got this northern stream upper low that's just north of Lake Superior, and they kind of do it tries to phase a little bit here as that southern stream system starts to lift up to the northeast. That's actually a fairly decent looking shortwave that's coming out, and eventually it does wrap up nicely once it gets near Cape Cod and then goes northeast from there. So yeah, I think the coastal areas are going to be tapping. They're going to be in the development stage, which makes the forecast really tricky because if you catch the development stage in the right in the right spot or the wrong spot, depending on your perspective, you could wind up with a bit of a surprise here. So I want to be cautious. The other question, and I kind of was impressed by this. I don't know what you think about this, Joe, but I'm going to bring up. When you like to look at the frontogenesis omega map.
Right.
Okay, so I was looking at this, and one of the things that struck me, because the conversation then reverts to the fact that, well, it's not really all that cold in terms of the ground temperatures, and I will give you that. But on the other hand, this is one of those instances. I'm looking at the NAM at Tuesday evening. Okay, and what struck me is actually how cold it is at the 5,000 foot level, roughly 5,000 feet, the 850 level.
Right.
The zero is well offshore. -3 cuts across Long Island. -6 is an area of -6 that goes from just north of Washington D.C., Baltimore to Philadelphia. And then sort of cuts in around Sandy Hook and then goes west northwest from there. And that collapses after 0Z. It's actually -6 at 850 just about everywhere. So I mean, if it's that cold aloft and you get a fair amount of intensity out of this, that's going to quickly correct those ground temperatures. So if we were borderline aloft and borderline at the surface, then I would probably be really cautious about the idea of accumulations here. But with the upper air so cold, if the model is correct, it's starting to generate a fair amount of precip, then you're gonna wind up with accumulating snows just about everywhere.
And I'm also looking at that. They refer to it on the tropical tidbits map as FEN. I'm not
Right.
even sure what
FGEN.
FGEN.
That stands for frontogenesis.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on by the end of the day, Tuesday and into Tuesday evening across Long Island, especially Long Island and the tri-state area, all the way out till about 1 or 2 in the morning on Wednesday. So that may be enough to, as you just mentioned, generate perhaps enough intensity to have a breakout of some snow.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think I'm really impressed with how cold the 850 is.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get we don't have it now. Well, the Foose goes out to Tuesday evening. So why don't you pull up the Foose on your end, and I'm gonna bring up the precip, uh, the surface and precip map with this. In the meantime, now this area comes out with a low in eastern Tennessee. I just want to make sure everybody can see this pretty well, and the map is centered. But you've got a low there in eastern Tennessee that runs into western Virginia and runs right across. So this is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday. At this point, there's snow in northern Virginia, northwest Virginia, and on up into West Virginia. Then by 60 hours, which is Tuesday evening, you have the leading edge of snow from, I guess that would be like, say, the Monmouth Ocean County line in New Jersey, just south of 195, southern New Jersey, down into Delaware, a small portion of southeast PA, and then it just kind of blows up after that when you get into New Jersey. But the NAM seems to emphasize, coastal New Jersey, eastern Long Island, because of where it has it takes the surface low, pretty much slides it off the Delaware coast and passes it, not too far from 40 and 70, and then the low is intensifying as it moves to the northeast. It really gets going for Wednesday morning when it's well southeast of Cape Cod and heading toward Nova Scotia. So it looks like, and by the way, this is a little bit different from the 6Z run in that the 6Z run has the surface low pinned up much further north and west, which I want to mention could still be a possibility, where you have, there's been a tendency for these lows to come further north. What we've seen of systems in the last 5 or 6 weeks there's been a tendency for some of these coastal lows to kind of edge a little bit further north and be pinned near the Jersey coast. So this is going to be a real tricky, I believe, with regards to figuring out, where the intent, who gets the intensity and who gets snow, and if there's going to be a rain snow line involved.
All right. Well, I have the Foose. I brought the Foose up. This is the 12Z NAM Foose, which takes us out to 60 hours or Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. At 7 p.m. on Tuesday, the vertical motion, the vertical velocity jumps just 6 hours earlier. A lot of subsidence, minus 1.2 at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday. All of a sudden, it jumps to plus 5.0 by 7 p.m. And the thickness in New York is 530. The T1 temperature is just 1 measly degree above 0 Celsius. Everywhere else it's below for you, but it is just a little bit above the freezing mark at LaGuardia. What is interesting, however, is that while this would suggest that there may be precipitation, I noticed the R1, the lowest level of the atmosphere on the Foose, 81% relative humidity. I've always said that you need to get the RH above 80% for a fully saturated setup so that whatever moisture is falling makes it all the way down to the ground. 81% is very marginal, at least in my point. It may be a situation where New York City may see a little bit of snow at that hour, but points north, and I'm looking at Albany here. Albany has a low level of 64% relative humidity. So that's probably why on the map that we were looking at a little while ago, that's probably why I said that from New York on south, it's more moist and would allow for precipitation. But points north and west of New York City, it may be too dry. There may be snow, but it may be Virga type snow. It may be coming down but evaporating before reaching the ground for places like Orange and Putnam County and northern Westchester. New York City may just begin to see a little bit of precip by 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening. And with a 5.0 vertical motion, that is pretty good intensity. So
Yeah.
that's why perhaps from the city on south and maybe east, you may actually see a period of steady snow develop during the evening hours of Tuesday.
What's the T1, the T2 and T3 at LaGuardia? Those are the
T,
temperatures at the levels slightly high. I forgot what the levels are, but they are
okay,
up there.
T1, which is the boundary level temperature nearest to the surface, is at LaGuardia is plus 1 Celsius. It's 99 or -1 at T2 and -8. It's certainly cold enough up
Yeah.
there at T3.
So you take those are cold numbers, and if you add to that some solid vertical motion, that
Intensity.
yeah, that's snow. That's going to be snow even for the coast if that's correct. The other thing is, Joe, I just pulled up the NAM total precip. Now I've been kind of watching this over the last 2 days, and there's been a general tendency for the precip amounts to go higher. And the model's actually producing 3/4 of an inch to an inch of liquid in southern coastal New Jersey.
Hmm.
The half to 3/4 is just up to about the south shore of Long Island, but it is generating, unlike yesterday when it was only generating what looked like maybe a few hundredths to a tenth of an inch at most. And now it's kind of generating some, 2-3 tenths of an inch of liquid into Wednesday morning, during the overnight Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. So that's a bit more significant. And of course, if you're, the question for places in South Jersey, for example, might be, do you get into that heavy band? Is it going to be cold enough? And the upper air certainly would suggest that it may even be cold enough away from the immediate coast for some snow in that area. I'm going to switch to the GFS in the meantime, so let's see what that has to say because
I'm just looking.
we got it.
By
Go
the way, I'm
ahead.
just looking for the heck of it, and for on the NAM, the 12 kilometer, the accumulated positive snow depth change in inches for Tuesday night for South Jersey, they have a 2 there. So if you want to believe this at face value, it is suggesting that there could be a couple of inches of accumulated snow down in South Jersey with this.
All right, so I got the GFS up, and I have the GFS version that is the radar, and just quickly looking at this, you see how it's a small system, and you see the connection, by the way, with the system up to the north. So you've got this upper trough. I'm sorry, I'm going to order my headsets on Amazon today. Uh, but here's you've got your coastal system, but you've got this other low that's up through the Great Lakes. So it's the two of them holding together. And by the way, this is a situation where you're not exactly dealing with the best looking surface, if only because of the fact that there's no real strong high to the north. But to me, those are different type of snow scenarios. There's not just one way that it winds up snowing. And here you're in a situation where it's definitely cold enough aloft and it's marginal at the surface to start. So but the GFS has got as it typically likes to have a low that's a little further southeast and maybe not, the northern and western edge of the snow is barely onto the coast and passes just offshore as it moves northeast. The GFS likes to do that. It always likes to be pretty suppressed. So, that gives you one of the other possibilities here is that, it slides out a little bit further south and east. I just wonder, Joe, because this has been a year where these little lows that redevelop have been pinned more northwest than southeast. And the upper air on the GFS is probably maybe a little bit flatter than the NAM. It's got the same idea. It's just a little bit flatter. That would be the only difference that I would see.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. We have had cases so far this winter season where the expectation for a storm track further south and east, and the storm gets its feet wet, intensifies a bit, and then curves more to the north and west. So this might be something to watch for Tuesday night into early Wednesday.
Okay, now I'm going to switch over to last night's European.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
because the European has been. Someone mentioned on a thread that I stumbled on yesterday about how this morning about how the European has broken the hearts of of snow lovers here, and that's in reference to the fact that the European has been putting up snow maps lately that just have not come to pass. Before I even get to that, I just want to show the new icon. I think this is the new icon. Yeah, the icon has got an even more suppressed low. It actually has a deepening low moving off the Virginia coast and running northeast, but it's just further southeast than the others. But the European last night, and this is courtesy of pivotalweather.com, and we thank them very much for that. And I'm also I'm a supporter of they have a site on Patreon. So just to you know just to disclose the fact that I am supporting one of their supporters. So this is what the European did in terms of snow amounts in and around the New York City area. It gives New York City 4.2, on Long Island, Brentwood, which is and 5.4. Actually, it gives me where I'm sitting 6, which is phenomenal. And then the amounts cut off once you go south of 195, 2.8 at Trenton. Looks like some 4 and 5 inch amounts in parts of Hunterdon County, and some 4 inch plus amounts in and around New York City. Staten Island 3.7. Up by you, Joe, in marvelous Putnam County, it gave about 2. Danbury 3. New City, it gives 2.8. So again, I would be really cautious uh, about the Europeans' snow map numbers because it really has not done well with these sorts of systems. And I'm just bringing southeastern New England up. It gives Boston 2.5, 2.8, and Gloucester, Framingham 2.3. This is, by the way, I'm showing this part if only to honor though the Patriot fans out there having been knocked out of the playoffs. Uh,
You know,
not
I was watching that game last night, and I'm looking at all the fans in the stands, and especially for the 6 hours from 7 o'clock Tuesday to 1 a.m. Wednesday, Joe, in terms of accumulated precipitation, liquid precipitation, and for much of Long Island, they have in that 6 hour time frame anywhere from zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.6 inches of liquid precipitation. And just south of Long Island, it runs 6 to 7 tenths. That's just in that 6 hour time frame. This, according to the European model, for the period from 7 p.m. Tuesday to 1 a.m. on Wednesday. That's a heck of a lot of precipitation in just a very short interval of time. And that also indicates why, on that snow map you just showed, that they're generating all that snow from New York City on across Long Island. By the way, the thickness, according to this view that I have of the European, across the middle of Long Island, the thickness is 528. I'm not sure what the surface temperatures would be, but it must be cold enough to allow for snow because that's what it's chewing out for the island of Long come
All right.
Tuesday night.
All right. So, well, look, if we wind up generating a half to three quarters of an inch of liquid, you want to take that. If you cut it in half, that certainly says every bit of every bit of 1 to 3, 2 to 4 inches of snow. I mean, it just again, just if you cut it in half,
Right.
just to be conservative. If you ever verified getting a half to three quarters of an inch of liquid and having that all snow, obviously the numbers would be more like 5 to 7. But if this were a winter where we would have already seen a number of snowfalls, you probably wouldn't be hesitant to go for the higher amount. But you're not going to do that now, given the situation we have.
Now
So
I'm looking now on the now I have access. Does your site have intermediate for the European? Can you
no,
look at the
you have the
okay?
in between. So you have
I have the in between. I'm looking at the in between. So now I'm looking at the very same time frame that I just mentioned,
right.
and from 7 p.m. This is from for the 6Z run of the European, and on the 6Z run they knock it down considerably. Now they have at New York City about zero point 0.1 to 0.15, and across much of Long Island for that 6 hour interval, it's generally in the 0.15 to zero point 0.2.
Okay,
So
and that would match up with what we're seeing with the Icon model today and the GFS. So it's the usual game now. We're just going to have to wait to see how it plays. The Nam being colder and somewhat robust. So we'll just do the usual back and forth swings from here on in.
what was
How
the year? What was the year that the European was always promising a big storm 4 or 5 days out, and then when we finally got to that particular time frame, it was just you know, and
yeah.
it was disappointing, run after run until finally I remember I was saying to people by mid or late January, I said, it's pumping out a big storm for four
Maybe
days.
that wasn't that maybe that was last winter.
No, no, no. This was like I think 2011 or
Oh,
2012.
okay, going back. Well, 2011, 2012 that was the what was it? That was the big El Nino or the La Nina year. I forgot which one it was.
Yeah, but they always were
Um,
was always saying or indicating a massive storm. And again, by about mid or late January, I said, look, it's been doing this
it
all the
ain't happening.
winter. I ain't buying it. I
Yeah,
ain't,
yeah.
or as our good friend Tennessee Ernie Ford would say,
I ain't a
I,
swallowing that.
I ain't a swallowing. As the whale said to Jonah, I ain't a
Ain't a
swallowing
swallowing
that.
that. One of the things, by the way, when for you folks at home to like to look at those snow maps, the actual number prints are really not very useful. It's probably better if you could figure out where you think the rain snow line is and look at how much liquid precip it generates and sort of go from there. And oftentimes I find that when you look at some of the maps that you've got where it shows the accumulating snow versus the higher amounts, you might want to contour that out. But as far as specific amounts are concerned, I've said this many times before. As far as specific amounts are concerned, when it comes to what these models spit out, it's just not a useful forecast tool. So I'm going to
Right.
switch to the long range, and the new teleconnection readings are in. And breaking news, nothing's changed. Well, actually, one minor thing has changed. First of all, one of the things that we're seeing from the Pacific North America Index, Joe, it is as stretched. I have not seen it stretched out like this with a minus 600 reading since the winter of 2017-18. We had those four nor'easters,
Now
right?
is that actually off the chart, so to speak?
Yeah, they had to extend the chart down to Usually, when this chart is minus, the general range most of the time is minus minus 200 plus 200. So I'm thinking that's 1 and 2 standard deviations from the mean.
Right.
So if I'm reading this correctly, so you've got the Pacific North America index at 6 standard deviations below the mean. It is
Whoa.
so incredibly stretched out in terms of, and that's reflecting lower pressures generally out in the west and higher pressures in the east. Or the lack of low pressure in the southeastern part of the United States. Remember that the Pacific North America Index covers a whole lot of geography. It not only covers areas in the northwestern part of the U.S., and it also takes into account the southeast U.S., a large area of the Pacific tropics, and also, I think, a small area off the southeast coast somewhere. So there's a lot that goes into this number, and in this index. And to see
Tim
it's
Belt, Tim Veltman, by the way, on the chat board here says minus 600 PNA, yikes, plus MJO phases 5 and 6 strongly. Break out the shorts.
well, the only thing that mitigates that, I believe, is that EPO index, which actually goes, it goes neutral in a few days and then kind of goes ever so slightly negative for the rest of the forecast period. That probably keeps it from getting, too off the wall. The NAO right now is strongly positive. There's another round of breaking news. It seems as if the NAO can't go negative anymore in the wintertime for long stretches. It does for short stretches, but not for long stretches. It comes down a bit toward the end of the forecast period. The only thing I would just caution reading with these teleconnections, which are basically snapshots of of the model runs. When you One of the things I learned from the winter of 17-18, when we were going into that whole period with the 4 nor'easters, when we had these teleconnection indices, all three of them stretched out to extremes, is that from a forecast standpoint, all bets are off. And I think models have a real difficult time reacting to the extreme nature that the atmosphere is in. So I would be very careful. That's why when you go back to what you said earlier, Joe, I just think you have to wonder whether there's still there could be these little windows of opportunity for some accumulating snow for some areas along the way, even though the general pattern is not all that favorable.
Oh, sure. And in fact, um, those of you who live in the lower Hudson Valley, they're doing a spread on my career and my forced retirement in February. Westchester Magazine is, and they asked me a bunch of questions, and they said, what are some big surprises in your life weather-wise? And I said, I've had a number of Gomer piles. I mentioned this the other day, in that you go on the air and you tell people, maybe a coating or maybe an inch, and then the next morning you wake up and look out the window and there's 4 inches. I mean, and then you do a Gomer pile. Surprise, surprise, surprise. And what you're alluding to, Joe, is absolutely correct. We could very well have maybe a Gomer pile come Tuesday night. We could go right up to the point where the event is about to occur, and all of a sudden you see stuff breaking out like, what the heck's going on here?
Yeah.
And it could, and again, these are these little windows embedded in what looks like overall, as you look for the at the month overall, a very warm blast furnace type month. But you can still sometimes get these little windows of opportunity and get a little bit of snow. Heck, we've said this often. 2-3 years ago, we had near record temperatures in New York City, and the very next day we had a blizzard.
Right. So it
it
can
happened.
happen. Now, I have the upper air, and this is up for this is for this evening, so it's close enough. And if you look at it really closely, Joe, if you look at this 500 millibar of the northern hemisphere, one of the things to me that really stands out is that there's two separate areas here. The polar vortex, okay, and your Arctic air. I'm gonna just kind of draw this blue circle around it. That's up. What is that up in northern Canada between northwest of Labrador? That body of water there that goes up to Greenland.
Baffin
Okay,
Bay.
so Baffin Bay. So you actually have the upper low sitting in Baffin Bay, and it's very, very deep. That upper low, it's like in the low 960s. I'm sorry, the low 460s. But that's where your cold air is, and the rest of the jet stream, you've got this kind of flow that's from the Pacific goes across the U.S. You get these short waves that are in Western Canada that are coming along in the flow. So your Arctic air is completely separated from the rest of the North America, and as a result, your cold air is stuck up there. You're getting Canadian cold air that's coming down, which is as you can see down in the mid latitudes, it becomes marginal. So this is just the nature of it until you can get a jet stream connection. If you follow the northern jet, folks, uh, here's your jet that goes around the upper lobe of the north. Here's your jet that goes across maybe southern Canada to the northeast, and in between, there's no real connection. That cold air is not. There's no train. There are no train tracks running from northern Canada down toward the Great Lakes and into the eastern United States.
It
So
just shears.
yes. So until you get some connection. Now, if you notice, as we swing over to Tuesday, there's a trough that swings around from that vortex and connects briefly this week. So now suddenly, when you get into Wednesday, after this system was off the East Coast, now you got a bit of a flow that comes out from northern Canada, and so some of that Arctic air actually does bleed down. So Wednesday and Thursday this week here probably will be on the cold side. But the problem is that when we go forward, once again, there you go. You get to the end of the week and into the weekend. What happens? The polar vortex is just again separated. There's no polar connection, and now you've got all this troughing that returns back into the northwestern part of Canada and starts to drop southward along the west coast. And of course, we've got this, now southwest flow here along the eastern seaboard. If you had, the funny thing is, if you had some kind of jet from Canada running southeastward into southeastern Canada and New England, this would probably be a far more exciting pattern than it is. But unfortunately, for snow lovers, you don't have that. And we're out to 168, which is next Sunday, and ridge off the west coast, trough into the west, ridge off the east coast, and kind of a zonal-ish type flow, I guess you might want to describe it that way, through 168.
I'm impressed by that high out in the northern Pacific. And I mean, like, can it get any more purple? Can it get
Oh
any?
yeah, well,
I mean, in terms of height rises. Is that right?
there's your negative PNA.
Yeah.
There's your negative PNA, and this is also probably why the East Pacific oscillation is also neutral to slightly negative, because we are seeing some pressure rises up in the Northeast Pacific, and that would bring the East Pacific oscillation down. So it's not good for snow lovers, but it's not entirely dire in the long haul. I'm going to bring the surface map up. Uh, any folks, if you're throw some questions up in the chat and see if we can address them for you. Certainly. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look.
I don't know. Elizabeth Harrison is not talking weather. She's talking about hemlines.
Well, at the end of the day, it's all about fashion and hair. So I'm just looking here, Joe. Gets pretty cold here in the Northeast. 516 thickness down here, 510 thickness on Wednesday. Then that cold high pulls out. Your next frontal system approaches. Low pressure runs up. Looks like it runs up west of the Appalachians. So we'll have rain and warm conditions here next weekend, if that's correct. Then another coolish high. We're out to 222. Colder air is like a 1042 high coming into just northwest of northern Montana, and there's higher pressures building east across the Great Lakes and into southeastern Canada at this stage of the game. And there's a little precip. There's some precip down off the southeast coast, from the Carolinas south and west, I guess, with a stalled frontal boundary. It's not all that cold at this point when we get to this is be day 8 on the long range. So that's as far as we go, as far as the new GFS is concerned.
I told my wife, I said, if it dries out on Sunday of next week with leftover relatively mild air, that'll be the day we'll take all of the decorations down, put Santa and Frosty back in the box and the reindeer and everything else.
Well,
Not
you could leave them up and then have someone come up to you and say, "How clever of you to get ahead of the game and decorate early for next Christmas."
exactly, exactly. We actually did one year. We couldn't get Santa and Frosty and the reindeer out because there was one. I think it was a few years ago. We had so much snow and it was so cold and the ground was frozen. We couldn't get those guys out until March. So we had Santa and our Christmas decorations still in view all the way out until almost the beginning of spring.
Yeah, you get those you get those winters every once in a while where it's unrelenting. I got into the habit of taking my decorations down around the 26th, those days between Christmas and New Year's. There were a couple of years where we had snow coming right after Christmas, and I literally took everything down on the 26th, just to avoid having them trapped in snow for a long period of time.
Right.
Yeah, and I've never been a big New Year's fan anyway. So after Christmas, it's like put it away. The outside, the inside, we left up, but put it away and be done with it. By the way, we've got 204 people here on a Sunday morning. Not too shabby.
Not too shabby and not much of a weather pattern to get excited about, and yet we still have a pretty fair number of people out there.
And by the way, as John Travachino just put up his snow numbers for 37 inches for the month of December, 8 inches of snow. Uh, so far we have the following: November had 8 inches, December 37. Now he's up in Western Mass, 45 inches for the season so far. You know what? You go north and west of Route 84. You November into December was actually quite busy. And throughout much of upstate New York, Albany had, I think, its 11th snowiest December on record. So,
Right.
again, it's this obsession with the I-95 corridor that dominates the conversations on social media. And not everybody lives in the I-95 corridor.
Well, of course, well, Albany had that 22-inch blizzard the first weekend, I think, in December. Hasn't been as exciting since, but that could help your snow numbers, at least when you look back over a span of a month's time.
Yeah, oh, certainly. The active period from November and December for to right up until we got to Christmas was very productive for snow for upstate and for New England. But again, with the absence of that once part early December, the block looked really strong enough that we had. But you could have as I've said many times, you could have the NAO as negative as you'd like, off the wall negative NAO, but if the troughs and ridges aren't in the right place, they don't really do you any good. Bobby Livingsworth says he can't wait for the first big snowstorm to talk about it on here. It hasn't happened yet since I've been here. Oh, we've had a couple of, well, all right, you have to go back, certainly 18. I mean, I've been doing live streams here for the last three plus years, maybe even a little bit longer than that. So there have been a few big snowstorms along the way, but uh, we haven't had one of those wholesale, mid-Atlantic Northeast blizzards that nails everybody. Those don't happen very often, so maybe that's what's missing here. Alaska Railroad is on, so I assume Alaska Railroad is from Alaska. So welcome to the my YouTube channel. And by the way, for those of you who are new, don't forget to go to Joe Rayo's YouTube channel, Joe Rayo Weather, and subscribe over there. So this way
Oh,
you get his live streams, and then you come back and you do my live streams, or you do my live streams, and then you go do his live streams.
and then you're all weathered out for the day.
And then you're weathered out for the day. That's correct. Scott Patton, do you think we will have a backloaded winter? I did see one of the folks that I follow. I don't follow very many people, but I do follow Cranky Weather Guy on Twitter. I don't know if any of you at home follow him. He's really very good, and he made a point yesterday with regards to backloaded winters, and I think it's quite valid, and that is, um, in our neck of the woods, all winters are, quote, back end loaded when you think about it. I mean, usually December into the early part of January, um, you have to have setups that, not that snow is impossible, but you don't have many snowstorms. The vast majority of snow happens here from mid-January to the first 10 or 15, 10 days or so of March. So all winters seem to, in reality, for the I-95 corridor anyway, are back end loaded. So I guess my answer to your question is more than likely, we're going to, if the weather pattern follows along, what we're in right now can't last forever. The atmosphere is stretched out to an extreme. It's going to have to crack. And usually when it gets like this, we're talking about, stretches that last about 2 or 3 weeks before they start to break down. If you go back to, I would probably mark the beginning of this as December 20th. So that says to me that maybe we're about halfway through this nonsense for snow lovers, and that we'll start to see changes showing up on the weather models. Maybe in the next few days, you'll start to see some hints showing up in the longer term. Actually, Joe, the Canadian has been showing hints already that toward the end of the forecast period, we might see we might start to see a change in the overall weather pattern.
I think someday, long after you and I have departed, and all of our viewers have departed this orb, maybe maybe 50 or maybe or 75 years from now, that we will have what I would call the universal weather model. In other words, instead of looking at all of these different models and all of these different scenarios, that there'll be just one singular model that everybody will hang their hat on and say, well, so and so model went for the universal AC went for this. Instead of saying, well, the European said this. Oh, and the icon said that. And the Japanese model, did you see the Japanese model?
That's the model of desperation. I always know whenever when there's no snow around and there's no hope for snow, that's when you see people go to the JMA, because the JMA will ultimately at least show some hope, and it never happens that way. And the JMA is being floated around, and has been for the last week or two. So like I said, things are desperate for snow lovers. Frank, is Zarek? What phase are we in between 1 and 8? I think you're referring to the Madden-Julian oscillation. I think we're in phases 4, 5, and 6, which are very. Oh, here, phase 4 now, headed for 5 and 6. Timothy Veltman responding to him. Yes. For those who follow the Madden-Julian oscillation, that has to do with winds over in the Indian Ocean someplace. And there's, if you Google it, you'll see it. It's kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. It almost reminds me of one of those origami things where one through 8, and depending on what phase it's in, kind of teleconnects with, if it teleconnects with our weather here. So it's in phases 4, 5. I think phases 4, 5, 6, and 7 are warm phases, and the cold phases are 8, 1, 2, and 3. So you have to look to see whether it's going into the colder phases later this month or beginning of February. Who knows? Sometimes what's going on over there doesn't necessarily teleconnect with what's going on here. I think that happened last year, where it went into phase 8, the cold, some of the cold phases in February, and it didn't matter because, again, the Pacific jet trumps everything in my view, and that was just way too much in control.
Latex Dreams is asking, are we not
Leave it at that, and just his name is Tim.
Are we not at maximum distance from the sun? Quite opposite to that. We just, I'm not sure if it was yesterday or the day before, we're at perihelion, believe it or not. The Earth is actually closest to the sun right now, 91.5 million miles away. But the distance from the sun really has nothing to do with the seasonal aspect of things. The main control is the tilt of the Earth's axis. We're actually 3.3 million miles closer to the sun now, as opposed to around the 4th of July when we're at our furthest point from the sun. You would say to yourself, how is that possible? But again, it's the tilt of the Earth, the length of time that the sun is in the sky, the arc that the sun makes across the sky. We only have about 9 hours or so of daylight now, or a little more than that, now that we're past the solstice, and that plays a role, much more significant role in keeping us cold, as opposed to July when we have like 15 plus hours of sunlight here at mid northern latitudes.
Jeffrey Maris asked this question, and I don't know what the answer is to this. He says, there's been a lot in the news about the Australian wildfires, whether they would have any effect on weather in the northern hemisphere.
I,
Honestly, I don't know.
I don't know about that, but there was an interesting post put up by our former colleague Addison Green a few days ago, talking about how there has been so much activity down in Australia that the smoke that goes up in the atmosphere actually creating its own form of convection, actually
Yes,
creating its own thunder.
pyro. They call them the pyrocumulus clouds or something.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Well, you know what? Not a shocker though, Joe, because I can remember when we had remember the Suffolk County wildfires back in the early '90s.
Right.
So I had gone. I was actually out there because they weren't far from my house. But I actually was out near where when I was working for News 12, covering it, and I was very, pretty much in the center of where it was all going on. And one thing that struck me was uh, just how incredibly windy it was in and around that fire. And basically, it created its own
Convection, its own.
convection and gradient.
Right.
The temperature gradient that was generating some big winds. So it was, I mean, I'm living in the eastern part of the United States. Wildfires were few and far between, and of course, the Suffolk County wildfire was a big story here. But compared to the wildfires they get on the West Coast, it would be the equivalent of somebody burning wood in a garbage can to keep warm in the wintertime. I mean, it was just not, it was a big story here, but nothing like what they get out in the West. But yeah, the impacts are amazing. Yes, Jeffrey Maris is pyrocumulonimbus. More lightning strikes starting spot fires and no precip.
Right. Right.
That's insane.
Right. That's crazy.
And the dry conditions there. Of course, it's summertime there. They also got into an early summer heat wave pattern in Australia. And by the way, you can pull up the maps of you at home if you go on tropicaltidbits.com, which is the maps that we use here. And we want to make sure we give a big thanks to Levi Cowan for letting us use them. There are there's a one of the locations you could pull up is Australia, so you can watch the highs and lows and moving around and how the upper air works down in the southern hemisphere. We don't really pay a lot of attention on it. From day to day. We never really look at the southern hemisphere.
Well, the Australia, the original question was, would anything down in Australia have any influence on the weather or climate in the northern hemisphere? Remember, Australia is what, latitude 30 or 40 degrees south, and they
Right.
have to be on the other side of the world from where we are. So I don't see how that could possibly have any major influence on us. But then again, if you believe in the butterfly theory, how a butterfly's wings flapping will
Yeah.
eventually set
Ripple
off a,
along.
yeah, yeah.
Timothy Veltman, basically they're dry thunderstorms, which, by the way, we do get here in the U.S. out in the West, and that it's a problem out west as well when tinder gets very dry, and that's nature's way of rejuvenating the forests out in the West, where these wildfires, they clear, they clear the old brush, and many of the trees that produce cones are actually they have evolved so that the cones require the fire in order to germinate, and the fire causes the cone to explode, and that's how the new tree uh, uh, you know is born.
I'm just looking here, Joe. My watch vibrated. It wants me to go. Yeah, it wants me to run 305 steps. This is one of those biz watches.
So it nags you.
Right. So I've already gone 1,002 so far. My heartbeat is 91, and now it wants me to get up off my duff and go run or walk to get 305 more steps for this hour. It
Well,
is annoying.
it is.
It's
I have mine is on my phone, and it's really annoying and kind of creepy because it seems to know when I'm asleep. It tells me how many hours I've slept. It's like, how do you know how does the phone know that I was asleep? But it does count my steps. It does let me know when I've achieved, certain goals, but it doesn't nag me. It doesn't remind me that I need to do, I need to
this.
do something.
This was originally my watch, and then I gave it to my wife because hers broke down. Then my daughter got her a new watch, and so this came back to me. And so for the first time in 2 years, I'm getting nagged again.
Nice. All right, so you got things to do today. We did a lot of weather today. We covered a
Yeah,
lot.
I'm just gonna relax a little bit and maybe do some typing or whatever. And it's not this is not the day to go out and take down your lights. Let's put it that way. With the wind blowing and the cold temperatures, forget about it. At least
Yeah.
for now.
Scott says highest January temperature for New York 71. January 6th of 2007. Weeks later, we had a 2-inch sleet storm, which I do remember. It was more like a 4-inch sleet storm on Long Island. Yeah, there's no, what that means, no clue. And there's no. If you get whenever you try to make connections with weather, you always do them backwards. You never really can do them forward. So there's no way you'll say, a year from now, you'll say, oh, we had this on a certain day, and 5 days later we had that. But when you try to do it the other way and go back and say, hey, we had this happen uh, not too long ago. We had this happen several years ago, and it was followed by a snowstorm a few years later. It doesn't always work when you forward into the future. There's just too many weather variables.
Yep.
Oh God. So all right. So we'll leave it at that. I'm going to be, of course, keeping things updated as we go through the day, and we'll see what the European has to say with regards to this situation for Tuesday. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, the football games that are coming up, and well, we'll see you tomorrow night.
We'll be here. I'm not doing anything.
All right, great. Thanks for being here, everybody. Really appreciate it, and we will see you later. Enjoy your Sunday.